I love the Hell in a Cell match. I thought it played out perfectly. Very significant in what we saw over the course of the match. And I kind of want to go back, Bully, because you mentioned about the press conference afterwards. I want to go back to the press conference from Saturday and something that Triple H said, because it was very reflective, and Bully, what you were saying leading up to the match that we saw on Saturday. So let's go back to Saturday night and what Triple H had to say in that Hell in a Cell press conference.
Drew McIntyre and CM Punk just put on a classic and a clinic and did it in a way that sort of what that is supposed to be. It's what Hell in the Cell is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the end of a when you cannot take each other any further, when the point of conflict has gotten to where it has no place else to go, you put it in Hell in the Cell and two guys finish it there. And when I look at that match, that's what they did. It wasn't about jumping off something really high. It wasn't about just crazy stuff. It's just about two guys with an emotional hatred for each other that surpassed everything else we could do in this business. So there's only one way to solve it, and that is Hell in a Cell. And it's what it's supposed to be. And they delivered a classic, all-time classic.
And Mark, I really do believe, in my eyes, they put on a classic on Saturday.
They did. And without a doubt, it was a classic. And Dave, you asked me a question. I think Bully was on too, or maybe it was Tommy. You said, man, that match was so good. Like, it should have been the main event. Why do they start with that? You remember that? It was a long time ago.
I'm sure.
It might have been 3 years ago. And I think that we were telling you sometimes it's not about being in the main event. It's not about being at the end. It's being the most impactful. It's getting the reaction, the most like from inside a response as possible. And if you see something all night long, you watch 3 hours of wrestling, 2.5 hours of wrestling, and you're in the last 15 minutes, they've seen everything. They get desensitized sometimes. So it's almost best when you have a match like that to go first. And it's not about a prestige thing. That's the thing. Like, a lot of people think, oh man, that's the Undertaker. He's got to be last. That's Ric Flair. He's got to be in the main event. That's Triple H and Andre. You know, they got to be in the main event. No. Sometimes the best is starting and setting the tempo. Not to mention, you can't go over. You can't go over your time if you first. Hell, if we go first, and they say, hey, this is like 20 minutes, guys, and it's really good. Bully has said it 1,000,000 times. He went over, but it was such good shit. 5 minutes over. And they go, damn it, man. You went 5 minutes over. But it was good though, right? Yeah, it was good, but come on, man. Like, it better be good. And that's what we got. That's going to be a historical Hell in a Cell match. And I don't give a shit how much time it took. Cut somebody else's time and go to them and say, hey, I'm sorry I ate your time up. But it was best. It was what's best for business. Your check's still gonna clear on Monday. And that's what it was, Dave. I'm sorry to go so long.
No. And I think opening the show the way that it did, especially what we got at the end, it made perfect sense. And everything that you said is 100% accurate. And I do want to go back to the sound and what Triple H had to say, because it was very reflective of what you guys say. And Bully, what you've been saying the week leading up to that match is that it first of all, a Hell in a Cell match, a match like that should be the blow-off. And the other thing is, I like what Triple H had to say is, like, you don't need people falling off the top of the cell. It really is about the match, about the feud, and the two people that are in that cell. Your thoughts on what Triple H had to say?
Here's the moment that the nation has been waiting for. Bully's breakdown of Hell in a Cell. And I got 2 words for you. Tool box. Put those 2 words together. What do you get, Dave? You get toolbox.
Thank you, Bully. I wasn't sure, but I appreciate you clearing that up for me.
So, as I said on the old Twitter machine when the match was over, I thought it was a great fight. I did not like the toolbox. I did not like the towel. I did love the match and everything about it. So, I was looking at what they did and the weapons that they use. Here's the thing about the toolbox. I just think I understand why there would be a toolbox under the ring, but the toolbox gets used so much now that I'm not shocked to see the toolbox. It's not a big deal to see a toolbox. It's almost like I expect to see a toolbox. Very rarely do we get characters who can carry the match in the cage and fans be as emotionally invested in the characters as they would be the violence. Go back to the old days of the War Games when the opening segment of the War Games was 5 minutes long. Arn always started. You always need your best workers with your biggest personalities to carry that first 5 minutes of the match, because people know there's not a damn thing that's going to happen within the first 5 minutes, but you got to start it off the right way and keep them invested. Punk and Drew's story, so damn good in that cage, in the Hell in the Cell. They can keep them invested where they don't need all of the unnecessary weapons. Now, here's the way I looked at that match. Obviously, going into it, I said the cage should be the weapon. Hell in a Cell is the weapon. That's why it's such a big blow-off match. That's why it takes years off of your career. It's such a deadly match. Oh, my God, the cell. It's an ominous structure and, all these bad things. Well, then let the cell be the weapon. Let the ring steps be the weapon. Let the posts be the weapon. Let the steel of the fence be the weapon. All of those are what comes with the territory. But if you have to use something under the ring, okay, I'll give you one. I think that they could have gotten everything they wanted to get accomplished with only one weapon from under the ring. Dave, do you know what it is?
Well, I mean, for me, from what I saw on Saturday, it was the toolbox itself. Like, that's really what pulled it into Punk's direction. He used the toolbox to hit McIntyre in the head and bust McIntyre open. Outside of just using that toolbox, I don't think it was necessary for them to ever use anything that was in the toolbox or anything else.
Okay, Mark, you go. You have an opinion?
No. I always wanted to do it, and I never got to do it. And that was to use the toolbox. Because the way that I would have used the toolbox, I would have used it to accentuate what I am. I would have got the toolbox, threw it in the ring. I would have shot somebody in, gave them a big boot, and I would have drugged their ass to the middle, and I would have opened the toolbox, and I would have poured all of the shit in the toolbox on their head and chest. And then I would have threw the toolbox away, and I would have picked their ass up, and I would have slammed them on top of all the shit. And I'd have grabbed their face, and I'd have rubbed their face in it. There would have been 2 pieces, indentions on their face and forehead and chest. And you just made a face like, because it's uncomfortable. That's what it's supposed to be. That's how you use it. using the actual box is awkward.
So
So
you both have said the toolbox, the one weapon, the one item that I did not want to see. Here's the only weapon I thought that they should have used. The table. And I'll tell you
no
why.
shit.
No, but not for the reasons you think. I'm going to go way outside the box with this table.
All right.
You see the table get pulled out of the ring and people get put through a table. That's the big pop. The table gets a pop from coming out from underneath the ring. You get a big pop from putting somebody through a table, yada, yada. The table could have been used in so many other ways. They used the toolbox to bust each other open, and they used the wrench or the whatever other tool was in the toolbox and the chain.
Screwdriver.
They could have used the table to do all of that. So you could have used the table for the suplex. The very first thing we saw was Drew rip the legs off the table. When those legs came off the table, that is a very unconventional weapon right there. That steel legs of the table will hurt you. One of the things that's always a concern when going through the table is how the legs of a table can impale you if you go through the wrong way. Also, the steel that goes under, the reinforced steel that goes underneath the table, that can slice you open. There is metal under that table, including the screws, that can really do damage. So if Drew would have busted Punk open with the legs of the table, and then they would have used the table maybe set up in the corner for the big suplex spot, now those broken pieces of the table become the weapons. Let me tell you something, guys. I have cut my hands open so bad on those pieces of wood, splinters, legitimate cuts, because you can't control them. You can't control it. Anything that happened, Drew being busted open with the toolbox, you could have done with a jagged edge of the table. The table could have been the weapon. The steel underneath the table could have been the weapon. The legs of the table could have been the weapon. And you're not used to seeing it used that way. Thus, it looks a lot more brutal. Imagine somebody taking the jagged edges of the table with the shard wood and rolling it across your head.
Ooh.
That just the thought of it is you cringe because you're like, wow, that's sharp and it's deadly. Imagine taking the steel off of the bottom of the table, and Drew can rip it off, and you take that steel and you wrap it around a guy's neck, or you take the edge of the steel and you slice his forehead open. Everything that was done with the chain, the wrench, and you didn't necessarily need the chain for the go to sleep. Nice effect, but not completely necessary. Here's my point. I really liked what they did. I would have liked to have only seen one weapon used. And I think between the wood of the table, the steel legs of the table, the steel underneath the table, the screws in the table, could you imagine them taking one of the screws and just taking a screw and slicing a guy's head open with it? These are things we're not used to seeing. I'm used to seeing a toolbox. I've seen the wrench used. I've seen all this stuff used. Shock and awe. Use things that they don't expect you to use.
And I understand where you're coming from. It didn't take me out of the match at all. I really loved that match. I'm glad that it stayed in the cell. So many times we see the action spill out. Sometimes we see them on. You didn't need to do that big spot, the big push off the top of the cage. None of that needed to happen. I like that it stayed within. I'm glad. To me, that was a proper blow-off match. And also to your point, Bully, and and you could tell it took the audience out of it for a second, was the towel. As soon as that towel came out, you heard the groans from
I
the
hated
crowd.
the towel.
Yeah, I loved that Drew McIntyre slapped it out of the ref's hand and said, like, fuck that. We don't, that to me, it maybe should have been Punk to do that, because it definitely got the crowd riled up. It got a pop from the crowd because they hated that towel. Maybe should have came from Punk and not from Drew. But again, these are just things like what you're saying, Bully, to enhance the experience. Some things that you would have done that would have made perfect sense where you didn't need all that stuff. I got to be honest with you, I loved that Hell in a Cell match on Saturday. Great job by both guys.
Without a doubt, as I said on social media, if I was the producer of the match, I would have suggested my idea of the table being the only weapon and being used in the conventional and unconventional ways. If Punk and Drew said, Bubba, we're adamant about doing the toolbox for A, B, and C, I would have said, I don't like the toolbox because I think it has become passe. But if you feel strongly enough about it, you guys go do your thing. And in doing their thing, they put on one hell of a cell match. It's not that I despise the toolbox or this. It's that because I've seen it before. Because that match was so great, I would have loved to have seen them do things that I have never seen before.
Yeah, but I thought it was a great way to start the show. And again, I know we've had arguments about blood, but man, when blood is used properly and in the right place, like what we saw on Saturday night, it's perfect. And it's good to see blood back in the WWE, because if you're not going to have blood, don't give me a match like that. Because honestly, if you're going to put on a match like that, you need to have blood. And I think CM Punk and Drew McIntyre showed you exactly why blood was needed, and it was the perfect blow-off match for that feud.